The image of the World War II soldier is often one of rapid movement, tank battles, and aerial dominance. But for the vast majority, the war was fought inch by inch, buried in the earth. The foxhole, the trench, and the dugout were not temporary shelters. They were homes. And they were hell. This is the story of how millions of men lived, ate, slept, and survived in the endless dirt. The term foxhole conjures a simple hole in the ground, but real trench systems were complex networks. The German West Wall and the Soviet defense lines reveal incredible efforts, deep bunkers, heating systems, and even wooden flooring. For American GIs in Normandy or Italy, it was often a hasty, shallow scrape. We compare the elaborate construction of the static defenses of the Wehrmacht to the desperate, last-minute defenses of the Red Army and the Allies. The first enemy in the trenches was not the opposing force. It was the weather. The mud of the Eastern Front, the infamous Rasputitsa, was a liquid grave, swallowing trucks, supplies, and sometimes men. In the trenches of Italy and the Siegfried Line, constant rain meant perpetual dampness. Staying dry was a life-or-death mission, leading to the scourge of trench foot, constant respiratory diseases, and the psychological burden of never being clean. A soldier's morale often rode on his stomach. Getting hot food to the front line was a complex and dangerous logistical feat. Kitchens were typically miles behind the line to avoid shelling. Food was delivered in large insulated thermos containers, known as marmites or thermos cannons, often requiring soldiers to run under fire to collect their meager rations. Hot soup or coffee provided a moment of supreme comfort. When hot food was impossible, soldiers relied on field rations. The American K ration was infamous: blocks of cheese, cigarettes, coffee powder, and biscuits that tasted like cardboard. German rations included dark rye bread and tins of canned meat like Leberkäse, meatloaf. These dry rations were essential for life on the move, but they were monotonous and often led to serious digestive issues. Soviet soldiers' rations were characterized by simplicity and resilience. Black bread, gruel, kasha, and sometimes canned pork from Lend-Lease shipments, affectionately nicknamed Second Front. When official supplies ran short, ingenuity took over. Foraging for vegetables, hunting, or trading with locals became essential. For many, a warm meal and a cigarette were the only things breaking the monotony of the trench. Sleeping in the trenches was a lesson in exhaustion. It was rarely done lying down and almost never in silence. Soldiers slept in shifts, huddled in small dugouts, or even standing against the muddy wall of the trench. The cold, wet ground was a constant thief of warmth. For Russian soldiers, a shared sheepskin coat or a bed of straw was a luxury. Sleep was not rest. It was merely the absence of immediate activity, punctuated by the fear of incoming fire. The trenches were an ecosystem of misery. The primary inhabitants, beside the soldiers, were rats. They fed on leftover food and, gruesomely, on the dead, often growing to monstrous sizes. Soldiers battled them with clubs and bayonets. Then came the lice. These parasites spread rapidly, turning the woolly uniforms into breeding grounds, causing incessant itching and spreading trench fever. Proverbially, the rats ate the food, and the lice ate the soldiers. Sanitation was primitive or non-existent. Latrine trenches were dug, if time allowed, often too close to living and cooking areas, leading to dysentery and bacterial diseases that decimated units. The sight of a medic with a simple syringe of morphine was a welcome luxury. When forced to remain immobile for days, soldiers had to manage their own bodily functions in place, adding to the constant, suffocating stench of the front line. Life in the trenches was a torturous pendulum swing between intense, terrifying action and soul-crushing boredom. The waiting was perhaps the hardest part. The silence was often more stressful than the noise, as it signified a potential surprise attack. The smallest sound could trigger a surge of adrenaline, only to subside into hours of anxious stillness. This psychological war was constant. To combat the crippling boredom, soldiers turned to makeshift entertainment. Writing letters was paramount. a link to the world they were fighting for. Card games, dice, and even reading pocket-sized books were popular. But the most unique aspect was trench art, creating objects like cigarette cases, lamps, and carved trinkets from spent shell casings and debris. This was a form of therapy, transforming the tools of destruction into objects of human expression. Cigarettes and tobacco were the great equalizers and comforters. For many, the meager ration of tobacco was a psychological necessity, traded for food or even extra ammunition. Alcohol, though often prohibited or strictly rationed, provided fleeting escape. From the Soviet 100 grams for the front to German schnapps, these substances served as chemical shields against the terror and the cold. Above all, the trenches forged unbreakable bonds. Life in a foxhole was a communal affair. Men shared the last cigarette, the last drop of coffee, and the terrifying responsibility of staying alive. This camaraderie, often characterized by dark humor and absolute loyalty, was the single most powerful factor in survival. The buddy system was not just a military rule. It was the foundation of existence in the earth. The daily routine was dominated by sentry duty. Hours were spent looking through a narrow slit, watching the enemy's wire or the slightest movement. The fear of the sniper was constant. Trenches were often dug in a serpentine pattern to prevent an enemy soldier from firing a long distance down the line. Observation was the most critical job, demanding total focus despite mental exhaustion and fatigue. In the mud and dust, weapon maintenance became an obsession. A rifle that jammed meant certain death. GIs cleaned their Garens, Germans their Kar 98s, and Soviets their Mosin Nagants constantly. Every spare minute was spent meticulously wiping down parts, applying oil, and checking mechanisms. The care taken of one's rifle was a direct measure of his commitment to survival. The history of the trenches is a brutal reminder that the most essential element of any army is the individual soldier's capacity for endurance. The GI, the Lancer, and the Krasnoarmeyets all faced the same common enemies: cold, hunger, and disease, all amplified by the unforgiving environment of the foxhole. Their survival was a testament to human adaptability, turning a hole in the earth into a temporary, miserable home. For the men who endured the trenches, the psychological scars remained long after the war. The memory of the permanent dampness, the stench, and the sound of distant shells shaped their understanding of comfort and peace forever. They learned the true value of a dry pair of socks, a hot meal, and, most importantly, silence. The war was won on the move, but it was survived in the dirt. Thank you for joining us as we explored the grim reality of life in a World War II foxhole. If you appreciate these deep dives into military history, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments, what forgotten aspect of World War II history should we cover next?